Hey guys, Happy New Year, Wyloch here. So there's been a lot of chatter lately on the Tabletop Crafters Guild group about airbrushing. I bought an airbrush about 2 years ago and I've been using it on the channel a lot ever since, so I figured I'd put together some tips and lessons and shortcuts and recommendations that I've picked up over that time. To be clear, this is catered toward people who have never used and don't own an airbrush and are wondering if it's a worthwhile addition to their crafting toolkit. So there's links in the video description below for all the products I'm about to reference. I use all of them and they all perform great for me. They're Amazon links, and so if you choose to use those exact links, your purchase is exactly the same, cost and delivery and all that. The only difference is I get a small kickback for having referred you. So easy way to support the channel at no extra cost to you if you want to. Alright, so let's go explore airbrushing. So this is the kit I started with. The brand is Master. It was awesome for doing base coats and blends. Not really capable of fine detail work, but perfect for learning the basics. I've since upgraded to an Iwata Eclipse, which you'll see me use in this video, but I still use the same compressor from this cheap kit. I use this respirator when I'm airbrushing. Actually, the paint spray itself isn't an issue, but later on the cleaning solution was an irritant, gave me sneezing fits for days. Bought this thing, problem solved. Link in the description below. So attach the hose to your airbrush and the compressor, and then dial the pressure so that it's at 22 psi. That's what worked good for me. There's a tolerance, I'm sure. 20 or 25 probably works fine, but for me 22 was good to go. So this airbrush is a double action gravity fed airbrush. Double action means that the trigger has two manipulations. Push the button in to start the airflow, pull the trigger back to retract the needle and allow paint to flow. The farther back you pull the trigger, the more paint will spray. Gravity fed means there's a cup attached to the brush in which you pour your mixture, as opposed to siphon fed. So let's do a miniature. I like to lay down a sacrificial piece of paper and have a rinsing cup of water, a jar of clean water that will never be mixed, and a garbage pot. I usually don't prime my miniatures. I've done a couple hundred miniatures now, plastic and metal, and never had any issues, but suppose you want to prime with your airbrush. This Army Painter brand brush on primer is great. You mix it like any other paint, and here's how I like to do that. Vallejo Airbrush Flow Improver. Water works, but this stuff I've found prevents dry out at the tip much better. I also have a retired junk brush that I use for all mixing in the pot. So a couple drops of that into the well, then squeeze in some paint, about 10 parts paint to 1 part flow improver. Then I dip my junk brush in water, just enough to load it with a bit of water, and mix it all up. The test I use for the right thinness is to tilt the airbrush back and forth and look at the surface of the mixture. If it's too thick, like paint right out of the pot, then it won't move. If it's thin enough, the surface will begin to move due to gravity. You want about the consistency of whole milk. You don't want it to be too watery. To restate everything I just said another way, start it out being too thick and gradually add a drop of flow improver at a time until the thickness just breaks and starts behaving more like a liquid. That's the sweet spot. You do not want to overthin. So watch this. Push down to start the airflow and pull back for paint. Now I'll try and do a very fine line. You see that splotch at the beginning? That's called spidering, and it generally happens if your paint is too thinned out, and in fact that's what I've done here. I mixed this a bit thin to show what can happen. Anyway, you can also see the thin line I can draw. That's the Iwata in action. The Master airbrush probably won't be able to do that. So here's a Tyranid Hormigaunt, a few inches away from the model, about half throttle on the trigger, and we apply a coat. Whole thing takes about, 10 seconds. And you get 100% perfectly smooth coverage with no clogging of details due to the thin application. So then I'm going to base coat it with Army Painter Skeleton Bone. So again, we're going to put in our flow improver, then the paint, and before mixing here we do the tilt test. You can see way too thick because it hasn't been mixed yet. And you'll get the knack for this after a few tries as to what the right thinness is. So again, several inches away from the model, we're going to start with low throttle and add more as you go. If you start seeing a wet sheen on it, that means you're probably putting on too much at once. It's better to dust it and do maybe 2 or 3 light passes. So here's a closer look at it under 2 different amounts of light, and you can see it's just a really buttery smooth coat. You have no brush strokes, there's no chalky finish to it. That's just an advantage of the airbrush, and it took all of 8 to 10 seconds to do this base coat. Also included here is a blue Ultramarine's Space Marine, and I've included it so you can see the smooth pauldron. Again, it's not a chalky finish, there's no brush strokes. All the armor plating, like on the legs, very smooth. So, again, huge time saver and makes you look a lot better than you really are. So you may recall we've used the airbrush many times before on the channel. You might remember doing a brown-green gradient for the riverbed and the functional waterfall back in episode 74. Here's that in action. Also, it's very handy for adding depth to terrain simply by tossing some black in the pot and tracing all the interior corners of a feature. Here's a building from a forthcoming episode, so just a quick line of Army Painter black to kind of tie things together. Or remember the fuel depot from episode 60. Here it is. Just add a line of black there at the bottom to, well, first of all, help hide any glue or incomplete flocking and create a nice little shadow effect. So that basic master airbrush kit can be and was used to achieve all of this. Now, cleaning the airbrush. You can easily do a lot of unnecessary work by doing things out of order, so here's the process I go through. It takes about 3 minutes. Flood the well with water, mix it up, and then dump into your garbage pot. Blow out the little bit that's left, and you'll have a thin film of paint still in there. Wipe it out with an old t-shirt or rag. At this point it looks pretty clean, but it's not. Pour in your Airbrush Cleaner. This is the brand I recommend. Again, link in the video description below. Then swirl that around with the brush and make sure it touches all of the well. There's still some paint residue clinging in there, and this cleaner breaks it up really good. Spray a bit. Then plug the tip with your rag and spray some more. It should bubble up from reverse flow, like this. Dump all the excess, spray the little bit that remains, and wipe out with your rag. Third and final step, add more cleaner, remove the needle, and blow the cleaner through. Again, you can also do the reverse bubbling thing. So I don't take it apart and soak the pieces in water or cleaner. I've probably cleaned my water brush this way 50 times now, and it still performs just like new. Also, they make actual mist catching pots that you can use to blow excess fluid, and really that's the right way to do it, but I didn't want to buy one. If you do, link is below. Now, I'm still very much an amateur. One channel run by an expert that I really like is Next Level Painting. He's got tons of great tutorials there for airbrush usage. Huge backlog of videos to go through. Great content. Also, there's a new channel in the guild community here, recently started up, Devious Dungeons Painting. And he's doing tutorials which often include using an airbrush. So subscribe there and help get that one off the ground too. For all you 3D printers out there, don't forget to check out Heroes Horde, where you can get TrueTiles models as well as a ton of other excellent fantasy-related scenery. I am Wyloch, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.